Hello, everyone. My name is Cyndy McDonald, and I'm an educational consultant. I'm a UCLA instructor, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm also a producer of the Friday Forum. And it's my honor and privilege to bring to you experts in areas in higher education, not just in the US, but throughout the world. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about education in Spain. And today I have with me an honored guest, Kara Madden. She's an independent educational consultant. She has over 30 years of experience guiding students through the international university admissions. She has a specialization in Spanish. She lives in Madrid, where I met you a couple of years ago. And she also works with students in the US, the UK, and other helping students go to other European destinations. As I mentioned, she's based in Madrid. She's the founder of Madden Educational Consulting, and she is also a course instructor in the international recruitment and admissions at the Instituto Franklin. I can't even say this.
That's okay. That's good
Franklin
enough.
Universidad de Alcalá. My Spanish is
Perfect.
terrible.
You nailed it.
Kara has advised more than 150 students worldwide, conducted evaluative visits to over 150 universities. I'm trying to catch up with you, but it's going to take me a while. And held leadership roles within the Independent Educational Consultants Association, whom we fondly called IECA. And she's also been the global committee chair. She's a former Fulbright Spanish program coordinator and Education USA advisor. So that's why I've asked you here. I know Kara brings unmatched expertise in cross-cultural advising, student-centered admission strategy, and global education advocacy. So Kara, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So you've been in Spain for a long time, is that correct?
That's right. Almost 30 years.
So tell us a little bit about, so you have that, you've seen the education system, you've seen how it's evolved over the last 30 some years. Can you describe for those of us like myself who are not really familiar with it, what's the structure of the higher education system in Spain?
Sure. It's been really exciting to see all of the changes over the years and how the higher ed landscape in Spain has changed and evolved. When I first moved here, it was pretty much one of the top US study abroad destinations, and it always has been. Always in the top three. It's also a top Erasmus destination. So if you don't know what Erasmus is, that's the European study abroad or student mobility scheme that allows students to enroll in a university in their home country, but then study abroad for a semester or a year in another European country. And there's complete transparency and transfer of credits and everything through an agreement that the EU universities have made. So it's gone from sort of being the number one host of Erasmus students in Europe who want to study abroad to also being the number two or number three host for US students studying abroad, to moving into this attracting 4-year or full undergraduate degree seeking students, and even attracting masters and other postgrad students like doctoral candidates and researchers. So it's a really exciting landscape and evolution. Even the National Research Council has seen a lot of exchange between Spanish researchers and international researchers, and it's a really exciting time to see how the Spanish universities are rising in the rankings. It's a really unique product, though, or a really unique destination in the sense that you have two systems in one, because you have public universities and private universities. There are a total of 89 universities in Spain right now that are accredited, and that's a massive number of universities for the size of the country, a little over 40 million. So it's a very robust and very rigorous university system, both in private and public. and it is a university system that is continuously evolving. This two system sort of dynamic, creates a dynamic that is marked by a lot of differences in, say, funding, tuition fees, how high they are, how low they are, and then the overall perceived quality of the system. Although generally speaking, it's quite rigorous, and there are a lot of really well-known public universities that are high in the rankings, and a lot of private universities that are also high in the rankings, the global rankings. So the public universities, for example, are primarily funded by the state. They offer more affordable education. Education is seen as a right in Europe, in most countries in Europe, and definitely in Spain. And tuition fees for EU students and for Spanish students are typically very low. They range from about 700 euros to 1,200 euros per year. They do sometimes, however, in the public system face some budget constraints because of this funding scheme or proposal. And that impacts a lot of times the resources or facilities. So you might see that some of the public universities may not have as many upgrades as some of the private universities, and or might face more budget challenges. So there might be more cuts. And so that's something that is really in the news these days, because one really interesting or unique, maybe not so unique, because maybe it is kind of more similar to what we know in the United States, but each regional autonomous government, so there are 17 autonomous regions in Spain, so each government has the right and has control over its educational system, even through universities. So it's like having 17 different systems or 17 different countries. So that famous answer that we have in the United States about any admissions question that comes our way is usually it depends. That's also the truth here in Spain because of this diversity and the regional control. Private universities, on the other hand, they rely heavily on the tuition dollars that they take in. They rely heavily on endowments. They might have much higher fees, and those can range anywhere from 2,400 euros to 30,000 annually, depending on the university in question. And that financial disparity can also lead to variations in class sizes, available resources, range of extracurricular activities available, research opportunities, etc. So those are some major differences in when you think about just how the system is set up. They also have very different access routes or pathways to admissions pathways. So they're very similar, yet they're different in terms of timing and in terms of the order in which things need to happen, and also in the kind of testing that is required. So those are some major differences between public and private universities as well in Spain.
Well, that's exciting, though, to hear about all those things. I think you touched on one point that I want to emphasize is before students were thinking more of study abroad, especially as a US-based counselor. Oh, I want to go study in Spain, or I want to go study, other places. But now I see a real strong shift in that. Why just go spend a semester, or a gap year is another option, where I can go get my degree in Spain or another country, but in particular the wonderful opportunities in Spain. And I think it's been very smart of the Spanish government and the country of Spain to really emphasize that and facilitate that. So let's talk about that timeline and how is that different? What is the timeline in Spain? And then also talk about the testing.
So the timeline for a private university might be very similar to a timeline at a US university. So the application period would open early in the fall, and students can apply And the difference, though, is that they get a reply rather quickly, and they usually need to, once the application is complete, they'll get an answer usually rather quickly. It tends to be rolling admissions for the most part. And they also, many of the universities also have several rounds of admissions. So depending on when you want to apply, you might find that you're on a very US, similar schedule. The one thing is that if you do find out early, if you've been admitted, they usually also ask you to place your deposit early. So this is something that most American students, for example, wouldn't be that in tune to, or would find kind of surprising. And they tend to be rather large deposits as well. So, and they're non-refundable. So if you apply really early, you just have to be ready to commit if you're admitted. So I think that that's one thing to really consider. They do keep the application period open rather late, because keep in mind that most Spanish students are not going to apply to university formally until after they've taken the Spanish National Entrance Exam for university, which is in June, and they don't get results, and the application period doesn't open until July. So they're used to doing this rather late if you compare it to the US timetable. But that's kind of a benefit, in the sense that it allows you to, if most students, for example, are applying to more than one country, so they typically aren't just applying to universities in Spain, although maybe for some students that is the case. So you just have to be a little bit smart about timing your application and really looking at, okay, when's the latest day I can apply? When's my target application round, given how important this particular university is to me and my future plans? And, how willing would I be to place down a deposit that I may not get back if I change my mind, if I'm forced to decide a little bit too early in the process. So those are some things to keep in mind. For the public university, it works a little bit differently, as I kind of hinted at earlier. The application period is not until July. However, that doesn't mean that you just sit and wait until July for applying to a public. You have to do a lot of groundwork ahead of time, especially if you're coming from outside the EU or a country that doesn't have a signed agreement with Spain for automatic recognition of the degree, of the high school diploma. And because the Spanish Ministry of Education and the universities are very, very equitable in the sense that they want all international students who are not from the EU to sort of go through the same type of selection process that EU students and Spanish students would go through. So they want to study in advance. It's like a credential evaluation for a high school diploma, but they want to make sure that the student has the background, since there is no agreement between the United States and Spain for automatic recognition of the high school diploma, since there's so much variety, and that can look a million different ways, which is different compared to how standardized things typically are here in Europe. They need to make sure that the student has the same qualifications, and they need to make sure that the student is following the same admissions process, right, in terms of an admissions exam. So since the SAT and the ACT are not recognized as equivalent to the Spanish National Entrance Exam, students coming from the United States who are not taking the full IB diploma program, because the IB diploma program is recognized automatically. And so for US-based students taking the IBDP, applying to Spain is a lot easier. But if you're doing a high school diploma and you have APs in the SAT, they're going to say, I'm sorry, but that's not equivalent to what we do over here. So we need you to take, apart from getting your studies recognized as equivalent, we also need you to take the Spanish National Entrance Exam, and at least the PCE exams, which are what you would closest thing to that might be what used to be the SAT subject test, if anybody remembers that, but that's a very loose comparison. So they have subject tests that students take in June, and they're in Spanish. So it can be really challenging for students coming from outside of Spain who don't speak Spanish to access the public system if they don't have an IB diploma. So just to kind of say that they would be on an earlier timeline to get all of the accreditation of their degree, of their high school diploma done. So you would do that. You could start doing that in February of the year that you're going to start your studies. And there's a really great website called and association with the intricacies, which I can share my screen with you so that you can see their website. The intricacies is where you go to get this equivalency done, and you can check it out. It's in English and in Spanish. So if you want to, you want to access it in English, for example, you can just hit English, and then you can get all the information that you need about applying to the public universities in Spain. So this is a really great tool. You can use it. We don't really have time to go into it today because there's a wealth of information here, but you can basically see here, country by country where you're coming from, whether or not your credential is going to be recognized, and if not, how you can go through the process to get it. If your system is not already automatically recognized, then you can go through the process to get it recognized. And then you can also find out what you can study and where, and you can get information university by university on what they would be asking you for, because there are different kinds of accreditations available in Spain. And so some universities, depending on which region they're in and whether they're public or private, might want a certain convalidation or recognition, and another university might want the other one, right, which is like more subject based. So it's really a kind of a world all of it on its own, but it's worth spending some time getting to know it as a resource.
And so this also, I noticed, and as you emphasize, this applies to all countries, because, I know in my UCLA classes, I have students from Asia, Middle East, non-European countries. So if they're in an IB program, wherever they are, then is that recognized no matter what country it comes from?
Right. It's the best case scenario to have an IBDP if you want to apply to public universities in Spain. If you don't have an IBDP and you want to apply to a public university in Spain, it can be challenging. It depends on the country that you come from. So, because that depends on the agreement, the bilateral agreement that the Spanish Ministry of Education has signed with the Ministry of Education in your home country. So if you're in the EU, then it's much easier, obviously, because of the EU recognition. They're all equivalent automatically. The UK credentials, for example, are no longer automatically considered as, they are considered equivalent, but there's a caveat, and that's that the exams, like A-level exams, for example, cannot be used in place of the Spanish national entrance exams for those subjects. Like in the IB, they can. So if you take the IB exams, your IB subjects can be counted sort of twice, if that makes sense. They'll be counted as the core for your high school diploma, but they'll also be counted as your admissions exam. The A-levels are not counted as the admissions exam. They're only counted as your high school diploma. So this is kind of I'd have to go into a long explanation about how Spaniards enter the university, but basically it's, to sum it up, it's an average. 60% of the weight goes to the student's performance in the last 2 years of high school, which is the equivalent of their bachillerato high school diploma. And the other 40% is their performance on the Spanish National University entrance exam. So they take the results of both and they average them together, 60-40. And then on top of that, students can take, so out of the subjects that they've taken the exams in, because this is a multi-day, multi-subject essay exam.
Wow.
So it's not just like a couple of hours taking something like the SAT, for example. So the subjects that most pertain to the degree program that they're applying for, that they intend to apply for university, count either 0.1 or 0.2 points more as like extra credit in a way. So they choose the exams that are going to be most beneficial for them because they're weighted 0.2, right? And then their performance on that exam increases their grade from 10 to a potential of 14, right?
Oh.
So they can get a maximum of 14 points by leveraging those subject tests on the National University Entrance Exam. And that's where students who haven't done the IB or who haven't done the Spanish exam or who haven't done an EU exam are at a disadvantage, because in order to get those extra points, they also have to take the Spanish National University Entrance Exam. And that, for students who have Spanish as a native language and who, or even as a really proficient second language, they might be able to do that, especially if they've known well enough in advance that they want to apply to public universities and they prepare for that. But if you haven't been studying Spanish language and literature, or you haven't been studying, math the way that Spaniards study it, then you might be at a disadvantage when you come to take that exam and try to get the extra points. And so the whole point of that is that your entrance to the university and the public university is entirely driven by your score. There's nothing else that they take into account except
no
for
holistic review of what you did, or who you talked to, or what you wrote about in your essay, or anything like that, huh?
No, not in the public system. In the private system, yes, but in the public system, it's all based on that one score. And so, and that score, like typically, who what the lowest score that entered into that degree program last year was. So you have an idea of what you need to get between your high school performance and your entrance exam performance. And there are references for students to look that up and find that out ahead of time so that they more or less know. But you're always at the expense of how it went for you on that day to see if you really made the cut or not. So it's all going to work on that score. So it's really important if you want to apply to the more competitive programs, which a lot of the programs that are taught in English in Spain, or that are bilingual English and Spanish, are the more competitive programs to get into, because it all works on the law of supply and demand. And it's not like we would maybe think, wow, a certain degree program in the United States might just be more rigorous based on the subject matter, right? Or the students' alignment of their high school subjects with the subject that they want to take in a university. So it doesn't really work in the same way that we might think it works, in the US, if anybody's familiar with that. So it works more on how many people wanted to study that degree last year and what the lowest score was last year. And then it'll shift every year. So if fewer people want to study math and physics double degree in 2026, then that score will probably drop some, because there won't be as many candidates, and fewer candidates typically could mean, it doesn't necessarily mean, but it could mean that students with lower scores might get in because they have more seats, right? So
It's just a matter of the law of statistics, and you create an index. And they used to do that here in California. They put in all the applications, look at everybody, the range of scores, they create a cutoff. Everybody above this score got in, everybody below this score got out, and the people kind of in this middle band, that's when they would read or do other things. So, but that makes it very, that creates angst, but it also reduces it, because these are the things, this is what you're going to be judged on. And sounds like it's a little bit easier to navigate the process if you're out of the country for a private school than the public. But there's certainly benefits to doing both. And there are many students who are bilingual, who could navigate both of those. Um, so what are some of those benefits of, once they get in, they get admitted, what are some of the benefits of studying, in Spain? What are some
In
other
Spain, I
special?
think the benefits of studying in Spain are many. I think first and foremost, as somebody who's lived here for almost 30 years, I have to say that I mean it's my home, and I can't imagine making my home anywhere else at this point. Um, so the lifestyle is a really pleasant lifestyle. The culture, it's a different pace over here, and it's a very relaxed pace. It's a very social culture. People make plans with their friends frequently and for a long time. I was just at some friend's house for lunch on Saturday, and I think we were there from about 1:30 until around 7:30 or 8 p.m. So, I mean, that's common. You don't, if you plan for a Saturday lunch with Spaniards, you don't plan anything afterwards, because there is nothing else going on that day except for that. So the sociability of the culture, the pace, the lifestyle, it's a very urban lifestyle, but it's a very manageable urban lifestyle. It's not very overwhelming, and even though this is changing, it's a relatively affordable cost of living as well in comparison to many other European capitals. And I think just the idea that Spain views education as a right, it views health coverage as a right. It's a very public transportation is makes it very easy to get around. It's a very comfortable and fulfilling lifestyle. And then in terms of the universities, I think the universities are excellent. I mean, there are numerous universities in the top rankings, international rankings, and the universities have a very outward looking, in terms of, Spain has always been a bit of a meeting place of cultures. It's always been a crossroad of cultures, and it's a very accepting culture for the most part. That's not to say that there aren't, segments of the population that might be less accepting, or it's not perfect. It's got its issues as well, but it does have a very accepting culture, and it has a very outward looking culture. And Spaniards love to travel. They love to meet people. Everybody's always learning English. Everybody's always, perfecting their English. And so there's a lot of just friendliness and interest in people from abroad. And there's a lot of exchange. So they've been a host country for American and European students for many years. And the climate, I didn't mention the climate, but usually, you're talking to me in August, so it's really hot right now. So it's not the best time of the year to praise the Spanish climate, but it does have a lovely climate, and it has lovely terrain as well, and an amazing history and culture. So I think the universities also, they have some first-rate research and innovative programs going on, and a lot of very interesting dual degree programs as well. And the opportunity, they have a lot of partnerships. So there's a lot of opportunity to study abroad as well, from Spain, if that's what you choose to do. And then it is interesting, the maybe a US education has traditionally been a little bit more practical, or quite a bit more practical than the Spanish education. For a long time, the Spanish education has been sort of viewed more as a transfer of knowledge. But I think that that's still there. So Spanish students who graduate from Spanish universities leave with a very strong and deep technical understanding of their subject. And now they're also bringing in a lot more practical experiences as well. So it's like it's kind of reaching that sweet point, that best of both worlds, where you've got the really rigorous theory, but you've also got opportunities to have experiential learning opportunities.
I think that is, as we look at the future and where education needs to go with the development of AI and all these things, having both of those, I think, is going to really fuel the future and the progress for students. Is the degree a 4-year degree, Kara, for a university, whether public or private? Is it a 4-year degree for students?
Typically, yes, they're 4-year degrees. Spain, when they used to be longer, but when Spain ascribed to the Bologna process and to kind of make university education more uniform throughout Europe, they reduced a lot of what were typically 5-year subjects before. They made them 4+1. So there's a lot of subjects where you have a 4-year bachelor's degree and then you have an obligatory 1-year master's degree attached to that. But I think a lot of times those would not, like, for example, I'm thinking of law. That's not necessarily a subject that an international student would come to Spain to study. In most cases, Spanish law is not really going to serve their needs, their professional needs later on, because of the difference, right? I think one other thing that I wanted to say about the attraction of studying in Spain is the language. Even if you do study in English, because there is a wide variety of courses available in English, or bilingual courses. Adding Spanish to your profile of languages is an amazing, career move, because, like I said before, Spain has always been a sort of meeting place of cultures, and it's always been the door to Europe from Latin America as well, and from Spanish-speaking America, and even in the United States. So it's a wonderful place to come and perfect your Spanish as well while you're studying, even if you're studying in English.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think that is one that is what people ask is, can I use this degree once I graduate? And you just made the point that yes, it actually can be beneficial. So are students able to do that networking and start building paths to future employment through their education in Spain?
There are definitely, I believe that there is still some work to do in that area, but yes, there are initiatives and there are efforts to connect local industries, especially also throughout Spain, right? Because I'm based in Madrid. I've always lived in Madrid, and my focus tends a little bit more toward the capital, but let's not forget the rest of the country. And there are a lot of regional strengths in industry. And so students choosing other regions besides Madrid to study could also have really great connections. And if they speak English or they speak another language, they're very valuable on the Spanish market. You can't see a job posting here that doesn't require fluency in English. So, or other languages, as well. So I think it's really, even by going to a smaller region, or, a region where there might be fewer students, you might find that you would have more access to local industries than what you would find in Madrid, just because there are so many more people. And yes, there are more opportunities, but there are also a lot more people vying for those internships and jobs. So, but all of my students, like in the master's program that I teach in, those who have wanted to stay, many of them have ended up finding good jobs here in Spain. And it's, they're doing a master in global higher education, so they're all in the education industry. But they've had really great opportunities. And that master's program, for example, actually is a combined work and study program. It's called the Teach and Learn, and it's for students who are coming over here, graduates of native English speakers, university graduates who are coming over to be teaching assistants in the classroom. And they study a master's degree at the same time. They can do a master's in teaching, or they can do a master's in global higher ed. There are many school management, things like that. There are many different master's programs that they can engage in, but that's one really great way for students to get some very practical experience in the classroom at a Spanish school and also get their master's degree, which really positions them well to go out then and get maybe a higher ed administration job, or maybe working in it for a language program, or helping organize study abroad programs for U.S. universities. So there, at least in that industry, I can speak to because I have a lot of experience in that. But in other industries as well, I know that the universities are definitely making it a priority to have experiential learning opportunities, to put those in front of their students so that they can be more competitive on the job market.
That's great. That's great. Well, you've covered a lot of great benefits from studying in Spain. I have two last questions. We've talked about the academic and the study. What about housing? So I know in Europe, often, here in the United States, housing is often included. Students live on campus, but that's not the case in Europe. So that's one big difference, I think. Not only US students, but as you said, Latin American people coming from other places. How is housing? Do they go find their own apartments? How is that handled?
Right. So it can be tricky, especially in bigger cities like Madrid and Barcelona. We're not immune to the housing shortage problems that most of the larger European cities or capitals are experiencing right now. There is a bit of a housing crunch, but it's still possible in Madrid and Barcelona. It's just going to be more expensive. So there are apartments for rent and students share. It's very independent living when you come over here. So that's good for students to know ahead of time. If they live in an apartment, then they'll be responsible for taking care of that apartment. Some universities do organize homestays for students as well, at least in the beginning. And so they might live with a local family, or maybe, yeah, or a couple or whatever. And so that's possible. And then they have a lot of privately run student residences. So those are usually available. Universities typically have not had university housing that they manage. They do have university housing. They're called colegios mayores, and they're on the campus a lot of times, but they are privately owned and managed. So they will be able to find like the list of the student residences, both the ones that are on campus or the newer ones that are popping up that might be multi-university residences. Like I'm thinking of the one in the Loop in Chicago for DePaul, but many other universities. So students can live in this massive student residence, but they might be going to 3 or 4 different universities. And that's kind of nice too, because then you get exposure to meeting students from other universities that you might not have met. So there is definitely housing available. It's just that it is kind of expensive. It could cost around 1,500 euros per month in the bigger cities, and it might cost closer to 900 euros per month in the smaller cities. So in smaller cities, there tends to not be as big of a housing crunch as we're finding in Madrid or Barcelona, and maybe even a little bit in Valencia as well. But I'm thinking of Murcia, the Catholic University of Murcia, for example, has housing available, very readily available, very easy to get from the housing to the campus. In bigger cities on public transport, in smaller cities usually on foot or by bus. So it's not as bad as in many other countries that we might be hearing about these days, but it's also kind of inching closer toward that state as well.
Well, but when you look at it overall, I mean, that's just knowing and understanding and coming from being much more independent. If you're going to go do your degree abroad, you need to be independent, and being able to do housing and things is a part of that. But when you start adding all the costs in together, there's still probably going to be much less than especially education in the US at the moment. And I think that's one of the things that's really drawing people to other destinations, is being able to do that. And from other countries, the draw to America has shifted. And so looking at other programs. So thank you very much, Kara. This has been so educational. We could spend another 40 minutes. But I'll have in the show notes the link to the website that you just shared. I'll also put in the show notes other websites that people can go to learn more about education in Spain. And I'll look forward to you sending me those as well, so that we cover all the bases. So
Yeah, thank you. I will do so, because there are many resources that can be very helpful for locating universities. We didn't quite get talk about that today, but the resources make it very clear to help you find, where you might want to study and what you might want to study. So there are some
one of
fantastic.
them is
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
I
exactly.
can visit it.
Yeah,
I got my one
yeah.
right
And I've
here.
got this one
St.
here,
Louis.
so
I tell people, you can go to St. Louis University in St. Louis, and I went to school in Missouri, which is beautiful. St. Louis is great, but you can spend 80, 90,000 dollars, whatever. Or you can go to St. Louis University in Madrid and spend what, $23,000 at this point? Like, I think I'll pick Madrid over St. Louis.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's true that the resources are, a little bit more compact than what you might find on a big, campus in the US. But I think there are so many other advantages, and just the experience of living in a city like Madrid, or living in a country like Spain, and acquiring the language and acquiring the independence and acquiring the intercultural competency. These are all skills for the 21st century that our graduates need when they go out into this really topsy-turvy work world. So thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you very much.